I know we're anticipating a few more people, but why don't we get started? I know folks are busy. But thank you all for joining us this afternoon for our session of cost estimating, a peek behind the curtain. Just to let you know, this is an informal discussion, so please feel free to engage and ask questions. I'm going to give a 10-minute heads up shout out as we approach the end of our session around 1, because I know everybody's busy. To get started, we would like to welcome here with us Peter Bradley, who is the president and owner of PM&C, and he will lead us into the exciting world of cost estimating. Thank you, Peter, for being here. Would you like to start by introducing yourself?
Yes, thanks, Tracy. Peter Bradley. I'm the owner of PM&C. We're a cost estimating firm based in Hingham, primarily working in the public sector, and primarily working directly for architects, or typically our clients. Although we do work for OPMs, and we have some contracts working directly for municipalities, institutions. PM&C has been around for over 20 years, and I've been around for a lot longer than that. So I've pretty much worked in every capacity of the business, with a focus on cost and project management. So I try and bring that experience and knowledge to all the projects we work on, and happy to start diving into any questions and trying to at least pull the curtain back, and you'll realize there's no mystique. it's we try and bring as much science data to what we do, but there's still a little bit of art in putting it all together.
Thanks. So I think we were talking just a little bit before this, and I was saying how, especially when I was what you would call like a baby architect, I was like, wow, how do they figure out these cost estimates? This is amazing. Like, right? Like, how do they do all this? And so maybe to kind of launch here, can you talk a little bit about the process of like when you get a submission and start digging into it and developing the costs? Do you have like a checklist of things that you go through? Do you have a template? Like, where do you start, and like what's that process look like?
I think because there's so many different ways we get involved in projects, but generally, we're starting from that feasibility, and we're going through construction documents. So if I just sort of started the feasibility stage, that in our world is the most critical piece of the schedule that we get involved in, what has the most impact at the end. So whenever we get involved in a feasibility exercise, we're always we want to reach out to our client and make sure that we're getting as much information as we can in order to create an informed estimate. And I should explain at this point that any estimate we do at the feasibility is really, it's a cost model. We're trying to create a structure upon which the cost sits. And so we're making assumptions along with our design partners on the exterior skin, the structure, the MEP systems. But at least if we put some cost to information, even if it hasn't been designed or even if it hasn't been discussed with anybody, we're going to start off from somewhere. And so having a way to inform the design as it goes forward from feasibility means you've got to start with as much data and information as you can up front, so that if the structure systems changes from assumptions we made in feasibility, at least we know why, what the costs are. So we're always looking at, when we get information, the main drivers, where does this building sit on the site? Are there any major site issues, grading issues? What is the geotechnical likely to be? Is there any information we have from previous projects? What kind of structure are we going to do? Is the skin going to be a high-performing rain spring? Is it going to be more of a masonry? We're trying to get all those information pieces together as early as possible, so that when we put numbers together, at least they're based on something. Obviously, we all know things change as we go through the design process, but we're always trying to start from a process where we have information and we're not just throwing cost per square foot out there. So that, to answer your question, we're we look at what kind of project it is, where it's located, where it is on the site, what is the information that's available, and also not asking too much from our clients in terms of, we don't need them to go out and do borings in order for us to make some assumptions about geotechnical, but having a conversation about it is useful because generally you guys know more about the project than we do. So we're trying to get that information flow going as early as possible.
This actually leads me to one of my later questions, but I'm going to ask it now because this kind of came up as, so it sounds like it's helpful, especially at the very beginning of a project to kind of, or it seems like it would be helpful to have kind of an early meeting when we kind of hand something off to you to start estimating it in that feasibility stage or those early SD stages to kind of talk through, for you to ask us those kinds of questions that maybe aren't in the documents that we're handing over to you, or to kind of start talking through some of those things. Is that, do you find that to be helpful?
We find that, especially on the larger projects that we're involved in, I mean, we do a lot of K through 12 public school projects through the MSBA. So they have a process already in place that, you're going to go through, and there's sort of a prescriptive, way to do things. But having that initial meeting is critical in those larger projects, just to understand, what the main cost drivers are likely to be. And we're fortunate enough that we do so many projects that we can bring a lot of cost data and information to projects very early on. I mean, some of it looks a little bit like smoke and mirrors because you have these 2 sheets of drawings and you get back a 30-page estimate. But what we're doing is we're trying to create a cost model again. It's not that this is going to be the way this building's going to turn out, but in our world, we need to have something that we can defend as a budget that makes sense for the project and that the client ultimately can understand. Is it triple glaze windows? What kind of roofing system? Is it sloped flat? There's basic questions that need to be answered. They all have major impacts to the cost. So all we're trying to do is create that document that has that information somewhere so that when we go to the next step, if the costs have changed, at least we can go back and say, hey, we didn't have enough money for fill, or there's rock here that we didn't,
right, or the system changed, right?
Rather than hey, it's just cost go up, so we're just trying to, create a bit of science and data behind what we all know is a very conceptual sort of fluid process that we're all in these early stages of design projects.
Yeah, this is interesting because sometimes I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect between the architect, the client, and the estimator about what is involved in an early stage cost estimate. And sometimes I've had clients they just want a cost per square foot kind of estimate, high level. They don't want it to cost them a lot to do. They don't want it to take a lot of time to do.
Yeah, no.
But what all you're saying is it makes a lot of sense, right? Because it helps if you have something that's a little more detailed and broken down, even if it's based on some assumptions, helps you track the reason for a change in costs over time, right?
And it's easier when it's a larger project than it,
Yeah,
for
sure.
small projects, obviously, if you're doing a, 5,000 square foot, office renovation or, you want a pretty quick sort of, analysis of the cost. But even that, I mean, I used to, have a slide that, one of the things was hard to scare, and it's that we were asking for a cost per square foot, because that to us, because we are in that world so much, cost per square foot on a building type is almost meaningless. It's crazy to even say that, but it really is because, we look at the elementary schools that we do, and you think elementary school, they're all the same, but the cost per square foot will vary from, $550 to $850, based on, lots of different factors. So if I give you a average cost per square foot and your project happens to be on the high end, it doesn't do anybody any good at all. Then you go back and go, well, you told it was going to be 540 and now it's 800. If I create a cost model and I say, this is what's driving generally the costs on projects, and you can decide, what approach you want to take. on this project, you know? Are you
Mhm.
gonna do geothermal, or, you know, there's a whole range of things that need to be discussed early, rather than like when you get into schematic design and you're like, well, you told us it was 950, and then I say, well, yeah, but you didn't tell me there's gonna be geothermal, you know what I mean? So I'm just
Mhm.
trying to, you know, put as much information out there without anybody doing a lot of design work,
Mhm.
so that we have a framework which we can progress, understand as the design becomes more sophisticated and nuances are worked out, what those assumptions were based on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm gonna take a pause and see if anyone else has any questions here from the group.
Hey, Peter, it's Lorraine. How
Uh-oh.
are you? Well, that was great. So I think, like we're dealing with the escalation numbers, and that has been like really difficult to explain, and people are having a really hard time understanding, well, this building was just opened last year and it's like $300 less a square foot. How can that be?
Right.
And they don't realize that the budgets were set at SD, which is like some 6 years prior. Is there a template or an easier way to describe what has happened since almost like even 2019, right? Because 2020 and 2021 seems to have been some of our worst years right now for escalation. And
I
do you
mean,
guys do anything to create an analogy or to help with that narrative?
yeah, I think because the way I see it, Lorraine, is that there's purely the market driven, escalation that we've all understood what's happened, COVID and all the rest.
Yeah.
And those have driven the cost, but there's something else happening that's more impactful on the cost, and that is the energy code changes. And so, and just the approach, that municipalities have going all electric and much more sensitivity to, to the systems that they're designing. So, I was looking recently, in the last 3 years, our average bid on an elementary school, I just mentioned, was around about $600 a square foot average, right? Um, and in the current projects that we have in our office, of which, there might be a dozen elementary schools, the average is $809 a square foot. Now, some of that is like because those projects are out in like 2 years, but still, that's such a huge difference. You can't say, oh, that's because escalation, is going up. A lot of it is geothermal, triple glazing, just, things that are just adding 30, 40, $50 a square foot to projects. So that's a difficult thing you know, to, to create a sort of an analysis on, other than just go back and look at what the average skin cost was in an elementary school. What is it now? What was the average HVAC cost? What is it now? Which we have done that. So it's a sort of a two-part answer to that, market, and then just the environment, the code we're living in is causing cost increases.
I'm thinking more like almost like a one pager, right? That goes, that's a big disclaimer, right? With our cost estimates, sort of explaining, what happened to the markets through COVID and what is happening through, just the building code changes. Like often what we see from the CMs, Turner puts out market trends and they're sort of telling you the cost of labor is changing a lot. I'm wondering if in your industry, Peter, if there's something that could be high level. So every time they open it, our clients open the estimate, they're first faced with, please read this first.
Because we in-house, we track every year all the projects that we have that go out to bid.
Yeah.
And it's a macro kind of approach to, to understanding the overall market, right? So, when I look at, for example, our typical is around about on average, the low bid will come in about 2% lower than our number, and the average comes in about 1 or 2% higher. And that's typically where we want to be in the sweet spot of things. And I'll tell you right now, this year, everything that we've had to bid to date, where the low bids is 1.9% underneath our estimates. So that tells us the market is pretty good right now. You're getting competitive bidding. The year before, which again was 1% underneath our estimate. Great, perfect. And then I look at 2022, the average bid was 12.5% over our estimate. So, you know, that is a huge spike that happened in that particular year. And, you know, bearing in mind, you know, our estimates prior to, you know, 2022 were kind of like 3% a year, you know, for escalation. So if our estimates had 3% and the bids were coming in like 12.5% over our estimate, that tells you, you know, that there was like some 15% or something, you know, on that year. So that's the, and then we adjusted all our pricing, you know, based on we're in a period now where we're seeing the estimates come in on average, you know, under our estimate. So, and that's, you know, that tells you that's the way we forecast our data is, you know, when I tell people it was 15% increase in 2022, it's based on that sort of metadata approach. But I understand you would like to see you know, a one page or something in there that explains the, you know, what's happened in the market. Or I always do. I don't want to like freak clients out as well. You know, sort of like you know.
Well, I think the current estimates are freaking everyone out, right? So, but I think what you just said is so valid, right? And it goes to the integrity of the estimate, right? We've always been within 1 to 2% of the estimate. And you don't want to be under, frankly, you want to be over. The estimates want to be over. Right? So
you want to be 10%, 15% under, you know. But
right. It doesn't help anyone if you're 10% over or under, because you're taking stuff out of the project.
This is what I use internally, you know, that big sort of picture, because that tells me, are we on the market? And we're lucky because we're getting all these FALSA bids, you know, so, you know, we're not seeing, you know, on the prices that we're putting in right now, like, anything that's coming in like way under, you know. On average, we're right where we need to be. There's always projects within that overall data that some of them are over, some of them are under, but generally that's the trend that we're seeing. I think it's just when people look back to the MSBA data that they have, that does not, you know, the projects that we're seeing in 2024 that are coming in, you know, those projects have all been on the books for a year or two, you know. More, you know. So what we're seeing today in the projects that we're currently working on is lots of geothermal, all triple glaze, you know, difficult sites, and you know, PVs and battery backup, and you know, lots of expensive items, you know, and so we're just the guys that are saying this is what we see as the cost. We're not, you know, putting our thumb on the scale in any way. You know, we're not trying to make it expensive or less expensive. We're just, this is what we see. And obviously people are freaking out when they see projects that are over $1,000 a square foot. And I'm worried about that. I mean, the MSBA are worried about that. But they're going to see those bids come in, you know, that's going to skew their data that's in the, you know, the MSBA system, MSBA website.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else?
Hi, Peter. I was wondering, I've worked on a lot of interiors projects where the existing condition feels critical to the costing, and have often tried to get the cost estimators I've worked with to go to the site to see the condition in person, because, you know, you can write a narrative and include pictures, but there's certain things that I feel, this might be my own bias, are only graspable like in person. And I've had trouble with that. So I was curious if you feel like the site visit is important, and if that's kind of part of your standard package, or if that would be something where, you know, you would be looking at additional services.
Generally, you know, I've been doing it a long time, so I maybe I'm the wrong person to ask because I've kind of seen every particular kind of building that we've worked in. I think photos and narratives are excellent. Going to see the site in my mind doesn't really bring much to the way that I approach projects. Clients that request it. If it's built into our fee upfront, yeah, we'll definitely visit the site. I think there's a commercial side of this as well. I mean, our fees are pretty low generally for a lot of smaller projects, in the 2,000 to 3,000 range, for some, small projects, even on the MSBA stuff that we do early on, our feasibility fees are very low because projects have not been green lighted. So getting out to the site for a day, well, it doesn't seem like a lot in terms of maybe in your world, because it's a different fee structure for us. That's the difference between a profitable job and not a profitable job, and so as long as we can build it in to our fee, we have no problem going out. And if that's something that's really important, I generally, don't, I really, unless it's, we're looking at a project that's so remote or that there's some logistical issue with getting, if it's a high rise or whatever. I mean, but most of the stuff should be able to be documented and understood through photos, Google Earth, without, I think, a site visit, but that's just my personal opinion. People differ on that.
Anyone else want to jump in with a question, or I have more up my sleeve next? All right. Oh, no, go
sorry,
ahead.
I have one. Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, my video's off. Hey Peter, I'm Chris. My video's not working. Chris from Mass. I guess my question is a little bit follow up to Lorraine's. We're also frequently in a position where our clients are like, several years or 6, 7, 8, 9 years away from a construction project. So projecting like costs and stuff has always been like challenging, especially like leading into a capital campaign or something. I'm going to put this website in the link here in the chat. I've had some good luck with the data that this guy uses, presenting it to clients, explaining the escalation stuff. But I guess like more specifically, I'm wondering where would you, for such a long duration, how would you approach something like that? We've been using like midpoint of construction, but if that starts to get several years in the future, it's 30, 40, 50% sometimes we found if you like really compound everything. It gets a little unwieldy pretty quick.
It's the only you have to rely on the historical indices of how construction has increased over like a 10, 15-year period, and there's that out there, that we use. So if you look at any industry, not just construction, the CPI, interest rates, employment rates, there is a steady kind of correlation between a lot of these, these graphs. So you kind of just have to go back to, if you've seen an average of 3% over 10 years, that's what you really have to base a model that goes out that far on. Knowing that within that 10-year horizon, there may be 5% spike, there may be, a recession that prices go down, but you can't predict that. So you just have to create usually a 3% or 4% if you want to be a little more conservative when you go out to the 10-year horizon. And yeah, I mean, it's going to add a lot of money to your project. But if when I first started doing schools, they were like $250 a square foot, and now they're almost $1,000, so that's what in a 20-year period, that's what happens. So and that's something that we always get. I mean, obviously we're no one likes the numbers, when we're generally I used to joke, contractors think the numbers too low and owners think they're too high. So that's when we know we have a good number. So it's just, but no one's happy with with the numbers, and no one's happy telling a client that if they build in 3 years, it's going to cost them an extra $5 million, whatever the number is. there's no sugarcoating what we do. We're just, again, holding a mirror up to where we see what the market is like today and what it might maybe like in 10 years is anybody's guess.
Yeah, interesting, Chris. There's a project I've been working on. Actually, Irene, who's on the call, I see. I don't know if where we're like looking at several different scope happening much out into the future and how that will escalate. And then if you shift things around, do things in different orders, we'd set up a spreadsheet where like each chunk of work, you could see what it would cost in 2025, 26, 27, 28, and so on. So you can see really clearly how quickly it ramps up, right?
And
It's
that's
interesting to see
with
it.
for like a planning tool, and we do a lot of capital improvement type projects where the owners are trying to understand what their exposure is over a 10-year period and what they should focus their attentions on in terms of early phases. But the reality of what we do is there is part of it is we're counting beans and we're putting numbers against the beans and trying to come up with what a value is. But the reality is we're trying to predict the market, which is really difficult because whether you package 3 scope projects together that are 5 million or 10 that are 30 million really reflects on the kind of bids you're going to get in the competition. And that's ultimately the only thing that we have in our favor, all of us, to drive costs to a better place is competition. That's the only thing that works in our business. I looked at the file sub bids. In the painting file sub bids, we get 9 to 10 bids. I don't think we've ever had a painting bid that's been high. On miscellaneous metals, we're lucky to get 1 or 2. You're lucky if you get it on budget, and that is all driven by competition. So that's a classic example of the more bidders you get, the more competitive your project is. That's what really drives the numbers, not what the door costs or how much your linoleum tiles going to be installed. It's do you have 5 bidders that are interested at that particular point in time in bidding on the project? That's the market that we're trying to predict all the time. So it's kind of difficult.
Is there anything you see, and I feel like this has come up in project conversations with CM. One of the projects I've been on is like how you make the project appealing to bidders so you get more bids. I don't know if you have any particular thoughts on that, unless it's necessarily your wheelhouse, but I don't know, it's an interesting.
It's not, but I mean, we there's obviously time of year, can be important. We're coming up to this summer bidding. The next 2 months, we're probably going to have quite a few projects that are bidding right now. That's not ideal. That's what actually happened a lot in 2022. We had this glut of projects that were all bidding around the same time. And you look around, the construction sites that you guys are all on, and you see, it's a graying workforce. It's like you got to get people interested in the trades, and there's not enough labor to go on when all these projects come out to bid. So trying to spread out your projects, trying to maybe understand what else is going on around when you're bidding and moving it around, being flexible as well, in terms of people always hate when bidders ask for more time. However, it's much better to get 4 bidders than 2 because 2 of them dropped out because they can't meet your schedule of the bidding. They're estimators like we are. They just have they don't have enough capacity to estimate physically to go through the drawings and estimate. So there is that. Make the project as clear cut in the drawings as possible. Try not to give them 15 alternates and keep your unit price schedule reasonable, and try not to try to be reasonable in terms of schedule, things like that. All help you guys. It's easier said than done.
Yeah.
You guys, your client is like start at a certain time and it has to be finished at a certain time, and you work backwards and you're like, okay, in order for that to happen, you got to bid it for this time. So everything I'm saying is nice in theory, but we all live in the real world. It's we're all scrambling at times to get things that I can do on schedule.
something else I kind of wanted to pick your brain a bit about was I feel like pretty much across the board, I've always been told it's like 2 weeks for a cost estimate. Doesn't matter what size the project is, doesn't matter if it's like a client's looking for like a cost per square foot, or if it's like a massive, very detailed estimate, right? Like, and if
Yeah.
anything, I've been asked more for like 3 weeks lately, like
Yeah,
give us
yeah,
3 weeks.
sure.
And on the one hand, like kind of two sides to this question
Yeah,
is one is like, well, a few sides to this question is why is that such like a hard and fast rule?
Okay.
And like kind of what's behind that? And then another is, is there anything as architects or clients we can do to, like, in a pinch, right? There are some situations where you're like, we can't afford to wait 2 or 3 weeks. Something came up, whatever, something pivoted on the project. We need updated costs sooner. And then kind of the last part of my question is like, how do you get so firm about that? And what can we learn from you on that? Because I feel like architects can kind of get pushed around on how much time we need for things. And estimators are very consistently firm on that. I kind of respect that and admire that.
So here's, here's the story on that. So obviously there are projects, like $100 million school project. We're going to need 2 to 3 weeks to just physically to do the estimating. I mean, it's a lot of labor to do that. And there's maybe, 6 or 7 different people working on different sections of that project. So, that makes sense to do 2 to 3 weeks on that. The thing about it is, and this is from a business standpoint, okay, so we love the large projects. They're what that's what keeps the doors and the lights on in our business. We also need the small projects to make it all work. Again, our fees are pretty lean. We have a decent staff here. So we need to feed in these smaller projects into our own internal schedule. And if we say, oh, we can do your project in 2 or 3 days, it may only be a day's worth of work, but we have to kind of phase that into our schedule. So I got to break someone away from a larger project, or if they have some time, we will say, here's 3 smaller projects that we've 2 weeks on, and they fit those in within their individual schedule. So it's it's an internal scheduling tool that we use, because otherwise, if we have, I mean, you gotta understand, we last year, I think we had 105 different clients that we dealt with. So we're on a monthly basis, we're doing 50 different pricing exercises sometimes, So when we get projects that come in and there's only a 2-day turnaround, it's fine if it's one project. And when we were smaller, we could handle that no problem. What it meant was I just worked nights and weekends and I got it done. So that's how I handled all those little last minute requests that come in. It's harder these days just because of the workload that we have. And so that 2 week to 3 week just buys us some time to weave those projects in. Not to say we don't turn around projects quickly when we have to, and there's emergencies and everybody, we're a client facing organization. We rely on our clients to make it all work. So we're here to serve you guys. It's just that if we open the doors and say, hey, I know it's only going to take us 2 days to do this project, but we need 2 weeks to schedule it. Usually most of our clients will give us a heads up. They'll once you develop your schedule with your consultants and your client, you'll keep us in the loop and say, oh, by the way, we've got this project coming in on the 30th of July. Can you turn around in a week? And if we know in advance, then I can look at our schedule and we commit to that, we can turn around in a week. It's just, we have had a lot of clients that, it's not even on our schedule. We get an email with drawings and we're like, okay, we're ready for the estimate. How long is it going to take? And I said 2 weeks, and they're like, but it's only it's a day's worth of work. It's just, we're not all sitting around waiting for your project to come in. We're all guaranteed we're all busy, and I can't stress out my staff. People, I can't ask them to work weekends and nights and be consistent like that. You just have to be respectful of the people that work for me. And a lot of times that meant I took on a lot of that. extra work, and I'm not getting any younger, so we've tried to really be strict on the 2 weeks, and on the larger projects to be 3 weeks, so.
Mhm.
But you can always ask. That's all I can say is
I know.
it's not a firm answer. You can always ask. And depending on our workload, we'll definitely turn it around as quickly as we can. And that's the other thing. When I say we're turning around as quickly as we can, I mean that. We're not pushing anybody off. We're not like saying, "Oh, I'm not going to like this project or this plan. We're going to push that off to 3 weeks. We're going to tell them we can't."
Mhm.
In the 30 years that I've been doing this, like I had a really hard time saying no to to anybody, because I built the business saying yes all the time, and so
Mhm.
that's still my ethos. I hate to say no. I hate to say we can't do it. Uh, I mean it when I say we'll do everything we can to expedite projects, but there are limitations that we're under.
Yeah.
Same as you guys are in terms of like, how many people you have working on projects. It's just, that's the reality.
Sure. Makes sense. Um, oh, and I had a follow-up there. Okay, actually, I think you answered all my questions on that topic. We talked a little bit about this. I think actually next I kind of wanted to ask you, it's kind of getting again peek behind the curtain. What would you say are estimators' pet peeves with architects? Like, does it just drive you guys crazy when we tell you we're gonna send you something on Friday and it doesn't show up until Tuesday because we had to button things up
No,
on our end, or
not at all, because I'm in the same business that you guys are, so I understand the, the pressure that everybody's under, with clients and deliverables, and everybody's, no one is like, going out of their way to try to make my life miserable by handing me a project on a Friday, but that's just around the thing that I think, if you say what's the biggest peeve in terms of how we do projects, is I would say by far the amount of options that we're asked to price.
mm,
I would say that that's the biggest um, uh, impetus to us being more efficient in how we estimate, particularly early on, because a lot of times we're asked to do, I'm kidding you not, like 10, 12, 15 options on large projects. And a lot of them are similar enough that the cost is not a driving factor.
mm,
So my pushback would always be, I know with you're working with committees a lot of times, or clients, and everybody wants to, study every single option, and everybody wants all the data and all the information, and they want to make a decision that's informed, and they've got to go in front of their community. I understand all that, but there's a lot of it that can be condensed, I think,
mm,
and costs generally in a lot of these feasibility studies, while it's important to understand the overall cost, the incremental cost between options is so slight sometimes, that having us do 8 to 10 options does the client a disservice, because we're not able to put the effort into doing as thorough job as we can, because we have all these different options.
mm,
That's the biggest, and we find it's getting more and more. I mean, we're not only we asked to price different options in terms of the building and the site, uh, 4 or 5 options on the HVAC systems, different options on. I understand we're all grappling with the energy codes and what the costs are,
mm,
so that's difficult for us when again, our fees are pretty low on these like initial studies, and we're just trying to get the best data available to you, and then we're getting inundated with different options that come up the works from our point of view.
mm,
But I understand that's it. Again, it's part of the the things that you guys face. You probably face the same things with your own internal, operations. No one wants to be, spending resources studying all these options that we all kind of even know some of them are non-starters. Especially as we've all been around quite a while at this point, we kind of know some of the options that are not really feasible, but or you guys are dealing with clients that are very often, committees that maybe the first project that they've ever done. So
mhm,
they want hard data to to make a decision. So,
Yeah.
and it's definitely very difficult, I think.
Yeah, I almost wonder, it seems like, you know, right, like you said, like, do you condense some of the options that are similar, not like they're not going to be substantially different in costs, and you have a rough cost for each one, you know, right? Like, so there's not so much, or is it a
Yeah.
conversation with the client where they can kind of understand that?
I mean,
I know.
one of the things that we've been thinking about is, so you do, 3 or 4 options that are, new, reno, different parts of the site maybe. And then you have a bunch of other options that are like plus or minus or dollar signs, but,
Yeah, right.
here's what the range of costs are likely to be.
Hmm.
This option here is, $3 signs. It's just more expensive than these other options. We're not pricing it out because
Yeah,
we just
just
know
relative.
relatively, because that's all I think that people need to know at this point is relative costs. Is one option more expensive than another? Uh, they shouldn't really care if it's $1.25 million more or like $1 or $2 million more.
Yeah.
Are they going to make a decision based on? And they shouldn't. I don't think they should make a decision based on costs that are pretty close.
Right.
And I'm talking, relative terms. So anyway, that's my soapbox.
And is there anything that architects do that is particularly helpful? Like,
Oh, the narrative-based systems analysis that particularly need a format on these feasibilities. I love that. It tells us exactly what the exterior skin is going to be. It gives us a breakdown of the percentages of glass versus solid. It gives us an idea of what the finished palette is going to be. It tells us, the structural narrative. No drawings, in terms of the structural and the MEP. The architect, having a few floor plans and a good site plan, but that narrative is just wonderful because otherwise we're making the assumptions a lot of times, and we have to put in our estimated detail and then hope, make sure that our clients are reading it and understand what our assumptions are based on versus having this narrative.
mhm.
And I love it when we see that. It's really
You're like,
it's
yes.
okay. Yeah, because we rely on information. That's what drives the cost estimate. The more information, the more accurate
Mhm.
your cost estimate's going to be. The more detail we could put in, the more comfortable we are with the numbers.
Mhm.
That's all a function of data in, data out.
Sure. All right, I'm gonna take a pause and see if anyone in the group has any questions they want to jump in with.
I've got one. Hi, Peter. Um, I'm wondering if there's anything, what you're seeing that's coming in, what trade or division you're seeing that's coming in particularly high right now. I ask that generally, but also I have a client who's very concerned about curtain wall right now, and I'm sort of curious if you're seeing that.
Yeah, good question. There, we're still seeing some issues in the electrical side of things with supply chain stuff. Strangely enough, still, having switch gears, emergency generators, things like that, major equipment. So we're seeing a lot of early packages going out on those things. Costs are still pretty much high. And on the curtain wall side, we did see huge spikes on windows and curtain wall more last year. Our typical window packages went from 130 to like 180, 190 a square foot, in the file. And that's a file so big for us, so we get a lot of data usually back on that. We're starting to see that sort of leveled off. Um, and also on the triple glazed side of things, we're seeing more competition, in triple glazed curtain walls that, we're starting to see numbers come in the 220, 230 range, and that for curtain wall and getting, decent 2, 3, 4 bids on that, So, I'd say that's from our standpoint, we're not that concerned on that. Other than that, it's just the typical, Miss Metals always an issue, not getting enough bidders. HVAC systems are good right now. We're getting pretty good numbers on that. Plumbing, same thing. So we don't have any major concerns pricing wise at this point.
Thumbs up there. Anyone else want to jump in?
I was just curious. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I just wanted to say we're just almost at the 10-minute mark. So, but
Sure.
it's great that everyone's engaged. So sorry, go ahead.
That's great. I was just curious, going back to what Chris mentioned earlier about like projects that kind of have a longer term projection. When you're looking at historic data, and you're going back however far, 5, 10 years or whatever, and averaging it out, when there are economic anomalies like what happened in 2021, 2022, are you taking them into account as they were, or are you weighting them because of the fact that they were anomalies when you're creating some type of like average to apply
Are
with your
you
projections?
are you saying when we're going backwards or forwards with our projection?
When you're looking backwards, when you're looking at just kind of the trend over the past few years, and if an anomaly like that happens, and then you're kind of creating an average, I'm guessing, to then apply moving, for projecting out, are you weighting those like as they were, or are you kind of saying, this is an anomaly, we're gonna maybe like back it off a little bit?
Yeah, exactly. We've not, the 2021, 2022 spike. I'm gonna say that's never going to happen again. Obviously, it happened once, it can happen again, but we couldn't possibly build that into a future model, just because it would take a worst case scenario. So where it informs is if clients go, hey, I come, your project is $800 a square foot. We did a project, 4 years ago and it was 500. We use the, that percentage. It is what it is, the percentage from 5 years ago to now, building in what we know. But going forward, I wouldn't use that 15% a year for 2022 in anything going forward, even as an average. It's just, you're going to get these blips, and then, and if you look at a 20-year average and you look at, historic indices, those all have blips in them. And it sort of smooths out to that 2 or 3% is what a traditional average in our industry has been. And that's the best we can really hope for. Is you just got to base it on what is a typical, 10 to 15 to 20-year average that has those spikes in there. I don't think there's ever been a 2022 spike in there. That's a real, that was a one-off for me in all the years I've been doing it. So, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it's a sort of I think it illuminates why these escalation indices that are used are just a tool for understanding what costs might increase to. It's not a, it's not a crystal ball. It's not a guarantee. And the thing about it is that what I think differentiated 2022 from other spikes in cost is 2022 was a material driven increase primarily, with some labor as well. Usually spikes are purely due to the fact that there's an extremely busy market and the labor is short and people, just put the prices up because they don't have enough labor to do the work. And if they want to get the project, they want to get a decent profit for it. Those are normal sort of, market conditions. To say the market is driven by fear and greed, 2022 was both. It was fear and greed, it was fear of like, I'm buying, my copper piping, copper wiring right now at a certain price. No one's giving me guarantees what that's going to be in 2 days, never mind in 2 years. I'm just going to put it up as high as I can. And then when they saw everybody was doing that, then it was kind of like it was a runaway train. In 2022, everybody was had an opportunity to increase their prices. I've never seen that before in the market. I wouldn't plan on the future indices to build that in,
Thanks. I don't know if you have anything to add on there.
I have a
saw you unmuted.
question.
Oh, sure. Sure. Go ahead.
I have a question for Peter. Do you typically get a copy of the bid results from projects after they're successfully bid?
Yes, I mean, for good and bad, our industry, there's no hiding. At least the way I look at it is, it's the numbers tell a story. They are what they are. So absolutely, all the public bid projects we do, obviously, there's a public bid opening. All the projects that we do have file sub bids, so we see all those file sub bids. We generally, if it's a GC bid and there's not a CM involved, then we'll request on the larger projects schedule of values just to understand, some of the nuances of costs. Absolutely, that's all the data that we have is based on what we're seeing in the market. That's the only way I can do this is based on what we're seeing in the bids. Otherwise, I'll be in trouble trying to guess.
I know we don't have too much time left, and this is maybe worthy of an entire session. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on AI and cost estimating in the future there, and how that might kind of disrupt the estimator's role. And all you guys are kind of like, you have a lot of data, right? And AI strength is analyzing data. Yeah.
I've been trying to, understand AI and, trying to use it. I mean, we've had some great technological, advances in my career. When I started, it was paper, and now we're all digital, and 3D modeling has been fantastic. The Revit and tools that we use, and the on-screen takeoff and the whole gathering of information has been, a sea change. The thing about the again, it's back to predicting markets, and I think that's really what I'd like to leave you with is I think AI will definitely help in understanding data, and people who are much smarter than me will probably use it as a tool to predict costs. But here's something that I leave you with. So the Federal Reserve, somebody once told me, has, I think, on staff almost 1,000 PhD economists, and they crunch numbers all the time. They're brilliant people. They take all the data that comes in to the Federal Reserve, and they make policy decisions, interest rate decisions based on all that. And they're often wrong, and it's just because you're trying to predict a market, and a market is people at the end of the day, and it's really it gets done. I just don't know any other way of doing this other than seeing where the bids are today, checking against the estimates that we've done. Hopefully we're right, moving forward with that information, applying it to the next project, building our cost database based on those prices that we're seeing. It's the future forecasting. I don't, I mean, maybe AI will help with that. But I'm sort of skeptical that anybody's going to figure it out. Because again, markets are just, they're very unpredictable. And, again, on a Tuesday, you bid a project and everybody's busy, and then you get one bid, and then you bid it on a Wednesday, and then they be 5 bidders, so who can predict that? I don't know, what's, so it's just, there's just so many human variables involved in our business of predicting the costs that I don't think anybody's going to solve that. Certainly not in the remaining sands of time that are in my career, but maybe a problem for someone else. My son always jokes. He's like, "Dad, your business won't exist in 5 years. It'll be gone." And I'm like, "You may be right. I don't know."
Who knows? All right. I know we're pretty much up at 1. I don't know if anyone has any final questions. Sneak them in here at the end. Otherwise, I think we'll call it a wrap. Thanks everyone for joining. Thank you, Peter, for joining us for this conversation.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the invite. Really
Yeah.
good.
I think this is a really popular session, so this was great. Thank you,
Nice
everyone.
to see some familiar faces. and,
Yeah.
Here.
Thanks to people for
Enjoy.
chiming in. Yeah.
All great
Sorry.
questions, great questions, by the way.
All right. For everyone, great rest of your day.